Eli Granger woke before the sun. The cold was the first thing that touched him, a physical weight in the small cabin. It seeped through the thin wool of his blanket, through the cracks in the chinking, and settled deep in his bones. He lay still for a moment, listening. There was only the wind, a high, thin keen that never seemed to stop out here in the Wind River Basin. It was the only voice he heard most days. He swung his legs over the side of the rope bed, his bare feet hitting the raw plank floor. The ice in the water bucket by the door was a solid sheet. He broke it with the heel of his hand, splashed the frigid water onto his face, and scraped a razor over his jaw in the gray light. He did not look closely at his own reflection in the small, cracked piece of mirror. He had not looked for a long time. His eyes, when they caught the light, were not blue or brown, but held a flat, dead kind of gray. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the end of things and was now just waiting. He pulled on his stiff denim trousers, a flannel shirt, and his worn boots. He built a fire in the pot-bellied stove, his movements economical, wasting nothing. He made coffee, black and bitter, and chewed on a piece of hardtack, staring into the flames. The cabin was sparse, a rope bed, the stove, a single chair, a table on a small shelf. There was a tin cup and a small, carved wooden bird, its paint long faded. He never touched the bird. It had been 4 years since Anna, 4 years since the smoke, the screaming, and the silence that followed. He had found them, the 2 men who had done it. 2 weeks later, he had been a different man then, fueled by a rage so bright it had burned away everything else. When it was over, and he had buried what was left of her under the cottonwood tree, the rage had guttered out, leaving only this cold ash. He had sold the ranch in Montana, taken his share, and drifted south, ending up here in Wyoming territory. On the edge of nowhere, he built this cabin with his own hands. He ran a small herd of longhorns, maybe 100 head, just enough to keep him busy, just enough to buy flour and cartridges. He kept to himself. The folks in the town, a day's ride east, knew him only as Granger, the man who came in for supplies twice a month, paid in cash, and spoke only when necessary. He finished his coffee, grabbed his sheepskin coat, and went out. The air was sharp, biting with the promise of an early snow. His horse, a sturdy buckskin, nickered softly from the lean-to. He fed the horse, checked his cattle, and spent the morning mending a piece of harness, his hands thick and calloused, moving with a slow, sure rhythm. He worked until the sun was high. Then he drank. He sat in the one chair, a bottle of whiskey on the table, and watched the empty land until the light began to fail. This was his life, a circle of chores, silence, and remembering. 20 miles east, in a cramped, cold attic room, Clara Mae Dalton also woke before the sun. She was 19, though the set of her mouth and the weariness in her shoulders made her seem older. She dressed in the dark, her fingers fumbling with the buttons on her faded calico dress. The house below was silent, but it was a mean, grudging silence, the kind that waited to be broken. She crept down the stairs, her bare feet making no sound. She was a ghost in her own life. Her uncle and aunt had taken her in 12 years ago. After the cholera had taken her PA and Ma on the trail west, they had never let her forget it. She was a burden, another mouth, a debt owed. She built the fire in the kitchen stove, her hands chapped and raw from the lye soap. She hauled the water, kneaded the dough for the morning biscuits, and set the pot of coffee to boil. By the time her Uncle Silas and Aunt Beatrice came downstairs, the kitchen was warm, the table set. "You burned the bacon again, girl," Aunt Beatrice snapped, though the bacon was perfect. "Yes, ma'am," Clara Mae said, her voice soft. Silas said nothing. He was a small, pinched man, his eyes darting about as if looking for someone to blame for the failures that clung to him like dust. He ate quickly, noisily, and pushed his chair back. "I'm going to town," he announced, not looking at anyone. "Business," Beatrice sniffed. "Business, more like debts." Clara Mae cleared the plates, her head down. She worked all day. She scrubbed the floors, washed their clothes in a steaming tub of soap, and mended her uncle's shirt. She did it all with a quiet efficiency, her mind far away. She dreamed of escaping. Not of anything grand, just a small room, somewhere. That was hers. A job, perhaps, teaching children their letters. She had one book, a worn copy of Shakespeare her mother had carried across the plains, hidden under her thin mattress. At night, she read it by moonlight. The words, "A secret door to a world that was not this one." She was outside, beating the dust from a rug. When she saw the buggy pull up, it was not a common sight. This was Wes Juergens, even from a distance. He was intimidating, a thick, broad man who wore a black suit coat even on a warm day. He owned the Dustwater Saloon, the biggest, loudest, and most dangerous building in town. He was not a man who paid social calls. Clara May felt a prickle of unease. She kept beating the rug, the thwack, 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 a dull rhythm against the rising tension. Juergens went inside. She finished her chore and went back to the kitchen to prepare the meager evening meal. The door to the parlor was closed, but the voices were low and tense. Her uncle's, high and pleading. Juergens, a low rumble. She was straining the potatoes when she heard her own name. "Clara May," her uncle was saying. "She's 19, strong, a hard worker. She's passable," Juergens's voice replied, heavy, appraising. "But is she worth what you owe me? Silas, that's $200, a lot of whiskey. It's not just the debt. Wes, it's a business arrangement, a partnership. She's good with figures. She could help at the saloon." There was a wet, heavy laugh. "Oh, she'll help. Don't you worry about that. I need a new girl, one with some spirit. The last one ran off." "She won't run off," Silas said, too quickly. "She's grateful, knows her place. We'll see. I'll call it a marriage contract. Makes it legal. No one can touch her. She'll be my bride, in name. She'll work off your debt, serve drinks, entertain the customers." "Entertain?" Silas's voice was barely a whisper. "Entertain. You know the business. She'll earn her keep, and your debt is square. That's the deal. She's at the saloon by noon tomorrow, or I'll have the sheriff here to take this whole place. Your choice." There was a long silence. Then, the scraping of a chair. "She'll be there." Clara May stood frozen, the pot of potatoes shaking in her hand. The water was scalding, but she did not feel it. Bride, entertain, saloon. The words echoed in the kitchen, stripping the air from her lungs. She knew what Juergens meant. She knew what the Dustwater Saloon was. She put the pot down. Her mind, usually so full of dreams, was suddenly sharp and cold. She had to run. Now. She waited. She served the supper as if nothing had happened. Her uncle would not meet her eye. Her aunt complained about the salt. Clara May nodded, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She went to her room. She did not light the lamp. She pulled her worn shawl from the peg. She took her mother's book and tied it up with a stale biscuit she had saved from breakfast. She had no money. She had nowhere to go. But she would not go to the Dustwater Saloon. She would die in the wilderness first. She waited until the house was dark, until the sound of her uncle's snoring drifted down the hall. She eased her door open. She crept down the stairs, one by one. The house was cold. The back door latch was stiff. She worked it open. Slowly, slowly. The cold night air hit her face. It smelled of pine and freedom. She took one step onto the porch. "And where do you think you're going, girl?" Her uncle stood by the woodpile, a shadow detaching itself from the other shadows. He had been waiting. He must have known she would hear. "Uncle, please," she whispered, backing away. "Please, don't make this harder than it is," he said, his voice flat. He lunged and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in like claws. "You ungrateful whelp. After all we done for you." "Done for me," she cried, her terror turning to a sudden, hot rage. She fought him, kicking and scratching. "You're selling me." He slapped her. The sound was sharp, brutal in the night air. She fell back against the porch rail, her cheek stinging, tears welling in her eyes. You have a debt to pay, he hissed. He dragged her back inside, the rough wood scraping her feet. Her aunt was standing at the top of the stairs, holding a lamp, her face a mask of cold satisfaction. Put her in the cellar, Beatrice said. She'll learn gratitude by morning. He shoved Clara May toward the cellar door, took a key from his pocket, and locked her in. She fell down the steps, landing hard on the cold, damp earth. She heard the bolt slide home. She was left in the pitch black, the smell of rotting potatoes and damp stone filling her lungs. She did not scream. She sat on the cold ground, wrapped her arms around her knees, and began to sob, the tears silent, scalding, and hopeless. The next day, Eli Granger rode into town. The air was colder, the sky a low, bruised gray. He had one last-minute chore. A hinge on his cabin door was loose, and he needed a replacement before the real snow set in. He rode Buck down the center of the main street. The town was quiet, caught in the breathless pause before winter. He saw Mrs. Gable, the preacher's wife, pulling a curtain aside to peer out. He saw two old-timers stop their whittling on the boardwalk of the general store. They were all looking at something. Eli followed their gaze. It was Silas Dalton, dragging a girl from his wagon. Eli pulled Buck to a halt. He knew Dalton, a weak man, always in his cups. The girl was... Eli squinted. She looked young, 19, maybe. She was fighting. He could see her pulling back, her feet dragging in the mud, her faded dress torn at the shoulder. "No!" She was crying, her voice raw. "Please, Uncle, you can't! Please, no!" Silas did not look at her. He just kept pulling her, his face a mottled red. He was dragging her toward the Dustwater Saloon. Wes Juergens was standing on the saloon porch, smoking a cigar. He smiled when he saw them, a wide, wet smile that showed a gold tooth. He looked like a spider waiting for a fly. "Right on time. Silas," Juergens boomed, his voice oily. "Come on in, girl. Welcome to your new home." "No!" the girl shrieked again, a sound of pure, animal terror. She tried to wrench free, but Silas was strong with desperation. Townsfolk watched. They watched from their windows. They watched from the doorways. Mr. Henderson, the storekeeper, stood on his own boardwalk, wringing his hands, but he did not move. No one moved. Eli's hands tightened on the reins. Buck shifted, sensing the tension. Eli watched as Silas shoved the girl, hard, up the steps. She stumbled. Juergens grabbed her arm, his big hand swallowing her bicep. "I won't!" she screamed. "Let me go!" Juergens just laughed. He pushed her toward the bat-wing doors. "You'll learn your manners soon enough, little bride." Silas shoved her from behind, a final, cowardly act. She fell through the doors, disappearing into the darkness of the saloon. The doors swung shut, thwack, thwack, settling into silence. The girl's sobbing was cut off as if by a knife. Wes Juergens looked at the silent street, his smile triumphant. He flicked his cigar into the mud and followed her inside. Silas Dalton hurried away, almost running, his head down. The street was still. The old-timers went back to their whittling. Mrs. Gable's curtain fell back into place. Eli sat on his horse, frozen. He felt a familiar sickness rising in his throat, the sickness of watching, of being too late. He saw the girl's face, white and streaked with tears, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond fear. It was the look of the damned. He looked away. He cursed, low and bitter. He turned Buck, his jaw tight, and tied the horse to the rail in front of Henderson's general store. He was just here for a hinge. That was all. It was not his business. He had learned the hard way. What happened when you made other people's business your own? He walked into the store. The smell of coffee beans, cured tobacco, and canvas filled the air. Mr. Henderson was behind the counter, fumbling with a stack of tins. He looked pale. "Granger," he said, his voice shaky. "Henderson," Eli replied. He was not in the mood for talk. "I need a 2-inch steel hinge and screws." Right, a hinge." Henderson moved slowly, his hands trembling. He dropped the box of screws. They scattered across the floor. "Damn it," Henderson whispered, bending to pick them up. Eli watched him, his patience thin. "You all right? Henderson? You look like you've seen a ghost." Henderson stopped, his hands full of screws. He looked up at Eli, his eyes miserable and full of guilt. "Worse, Eli. We all just watched it." Eli said nothing. He just waited. "That girl," Henderson said, his voice cracking. "That was Clara Mae Dalton. Silas's niece, a good girl, quiet, always had her nose in a book." He stood up, dumping the screws on the counter. He sold her. Eli sold her to Juergens. Had a debt. Juergens is calling it a marriage contract, but it ain't. It's just, she's to be one of his girls. And us. We just watched." Eli's face was stone. He placed 2 coins on the counter. "Clara Mae Dalton," he repeated. The name felt heavy. "It ain't right," Henderson said, bagging the hinge. "But Juergens, he owns the sheriff. He owns this town. What's a man to do?" Eli took the bag. He did not answer. He turned and walked out of the store. The street was empty now, as if nothing had happened. But the mud by the saloon steps was churned up, and he could see a small, torn piece of calico fabric snagged on a splintered board. He untied Buck, mounted, and rode out of town. He did not look back. The ride home was long. The wind picked up, driving the first stinging flakes of snow against his face. The trail was narrow, winding up into the high country. The land was beautiful and terrible, a place that didn't care one way or another about the small, cruel dramas of men. Eli tried to empty his mind. He tried to think of his cattle, of the coming winter, of the hinge in his saddlebag. But he could not. He kept seeing her face. Clara Mae. He saw her eyes, wide and pleading. He saw her dignity trampled in the mud of a town that was too cowardly to help. And then he saw another face. Anna. The memory came on him like a physical blow, sharp and sudden. He saw Anna, her face streaked with soot and terror. He remembered her last moments. The story pieced together later from the tracks and the blood. The fight she had put up. The way she must have called for him. He had been miles away, checking a line. When it happened, he had been too late. He had failed her. He pulled Buck to a stop. The horse snorted, its breath pluming in the cold. He had looked away. He had ridden out of town. He had left that girl, Clara Mae, to the same fate. Maybe not death by fire, but death all the same. A slower, meaner kind of death. The sickness in his gut was choking him. He had run to this cabin to hide from the world, to hide from the man he had become. But the world had found him. It had shown him his own cowardice, clear as day. On a muddy street at noon, he rode the rest of the way in a cold fury. It was dark when he reached the cabin. He unsaddled Buck, fed him, his movements automatic. He went inside. He did not light the lamp. He did not light the fire. The supplies from Henderson sat on the table. Forgotten. He pulled the chair out and sat down in the dark. He found the bottle of whiskey. He pulled the cork with his teeth and drank, long and deep. The liquor burned, but it did not warm him. It did not dull the image of her face. Clara Mae, Anna, 2 faces, 1 terror. He drank through the night. The wind howled, rattling the cabin door. He sat there, unmoving, staring at the small wooden bird on the shelf, seeing only her eyes. He was a man drowning in his own guilt. He was the man who had looked away. He was the man who was too late. The whiskey was gone. The bottle was empty. And the dawn came, a pale, sick, gray light that crept into the cabin. He had not slept. He felt hollowed out, scoured clean by the long, dark night. He stood up. His joints ached from the cold. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He had failed Anna. He could not bring her back. He had tried to hide from her ghost, but her ghost was here, in this room, and it was pointing a finger at him. He could not save Anna, but Clara Mae Dalton was not dead yet. He walked to the wall where his rifle hung. He took down the Winchester. The metal was cold to the touch. He checked the action. He walked to his shelf, pulled down the box of cartridges, and began to fill his pockets. The small, heavy brass cylinders felt solid, real. He pulled on his sheepskin coat. He settled his hat low on his brow. He walked out into the freezing dawn, his step steady. He saddled Buck. The horse seemed to know. There was no gentleness in him this morning. He mounted up and turned the horse back toward the town. He did not know what he would do. He did not have a plan. He just knew he was done looking away. The darkness in the cellar had been absolute, but the small, filthy room above the saloon was worse. It was a darkness filled with noise, the tinny, relentless plinking of a piano, the roar of men's laughter, the sharp crack of billiard balls, and the sound of someone being sick in the alley below her window. Clara May had been dragged from the cellar by her uncle, thrown into his wagon, and delivered to the Dustwater Saloon just after noon. She had not been in the place more than a minute before Wes Juergens had his hands on her. He had shoved her up a narrow, rickety set of stairs, his hand locked on the back of her neck, and thrown her into this room. It was a closet, mostly, with a soiled cot and a single, grime-caked window. "You're here to work, girl." Juergens had sneered, his breath hot and stale with whiskey. "And you're mine. Your uncle saw to that. You run, I'll find you. You fight me, I'll break you. You cry." He had leaned in close, his gold tooth glinting in the dim light. "I like it when they cry, but it don't change nothing." He left, locking the door from the outside. That had been hours ago. Now, the sun was setting, and the noise from downstairs was growing, swelling into a beast. Clara's first day, her first true hour, began with a key scraping in the lock. The door swung open, and Juergens stood there, holding something in his hand. It was a dress of cheap, shiny red satin, with black lace at the bosom and a hem that barely grazed the knee. It was the kind of dress she had seen once on a woman in a traveling show, a woman everyone had whispered about. "Put it on," he said. Clara recoiled, shaking her head, her throat tight with terror. "No, please, I can't. I'll work. I'll scrub your floors. I'll wash glasses. Please, Mr. Juergens, I'll do anything, but not this." He did not raise his voice. He simply moved into the room and, with a swift, brutal motion, grabbed the front of her calico dress. The worn fabric ripped from her shoulder to her waist. The sound like a tear in the fabric of the world. She screamed, clutching the pieces to her chest. He slapped her. It was not a quick, stinging slap like her uncle's. It was a heavy, open-palmed blow that sent her staggering back onto the cot, her ear ringing, stars exploding behind her eyes. Tears of pain and humiliation streamed down her face. "I ain't asking," he said, his voice a low growl. He threw the red dress onto her lap. "You cry. I'll give you a reason. You got 5 minutes to be downstairs, or I'm sending Pike up to dress you myself, and he ain't gentle." He left. The lock clicked. Clara sat shaking, the ringing in her ear replaced by the pounding of her own heart. She was cold, exposed, and utterly broken. Her dignity, her last possession, had been torn from her with the dress. She looked at the red satin. It was a brand. She knew if she put it on, she would never be Clara May Dalton again. She would be a thing, his thing. She cried, but she did it silently, her shoulders heaving. The threat of Pike, a massive, dull-eyed man she had seen downstairs, was real. With trembling fingers, she shed the remains of her old life and pulled the cold, slick satin over her skin. It felt like a shroud. It was tight, pushing her bosom up and out, leaving her arms and legs bare to the cold air. She did not recognize the person who stared back at her from the cracked mirror. This was a painted doll, a victim. A key turned. It wasn't Juergens. A woman slipped in, closing the door quietly. She was older than Clara, maybe 30, with tired blue eyes, hair the color of straw, and a small, hopeful smile painted on her mouth. She wore a similar dress, but in a faded blue. "He sent me to fetch you," the woman said, her voice low. "My name's Maybelle. What's yours?" "Clara May," she whispered, her hands instinctively trying to pull the dress down. Maybelle's eyes softened with a pity that was almost as painful as the slap. Lord, you're just a baby. Listen to me. Clara May, there ain't no use in fighting. Not that way. You see that window? It's a 20-foot drop to a broken bottle alley. You see that door? Wes has the only key. What can I do? Clara pleaded, fresh tears welling. You survive, Maybelle said, her voice suddenly hard. You do what you have to do to see the sun come up tomorrow. You smile. You pour the drinks. When they touch you, you let 'em, long as it's just hands. When Wes tells you to do something, you do it, but you keep your mind separate. You build a wall inside, and you don't let 'em touch what's behind it. That's how you live. You hear me? Clara could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. Good girl. Now, pinch your cheeks. You look like a ghost, and don't cry where he can see you. He likes it, but it makes the customers nervous. Come on. Maybelle led her out and down the stairs. The wave of noise, heat, and smoke hit Clara like a physical blow. The saloon was packed. Dozens of men, cowboys, miners, drifters, crammed shoulder to shoulder, their faces red in the lantern light. A cloud of blue-gray tobacco smoke hung so thick she could barely see the far wall. The piano player was hammering out a tune that was drowned by the shouting. Juergens was at the bar. He saw her. His smile was one of possession. He pointed a thick finger at her, then at the floor. He wanted her to parade. Maybelle gave her a gentle push. Just walk, honey. Walk the room. Let 'em see you. Clara stepped onto the sawdust-covered floor. It was the longest walk of her life. Silence fell, one table at a time. As men turned to look, their eyes were hungry. They were not looking at a person, they were looking at fresh meat. They appraised her, their gazes crawling over her bare shoulders, her legs. She heard a low whistle. A man reached out to grab her wrist. She flinched, pulling away. She's new, he shouted. Juergens, you old dog, where'd you find this one? She's my new wife. Boys, Juergens roared, and the room erupted in laughter. But she's here to serve you. Be nice. The piano started again. The noise resumed, but the feeling in the room had changed. It was sharper, charged with a new, ugly energy. Clara's night was a blur of nightmares. Men grabbed her. They put their hands on her waist, her arms, her back. She poured whiskey with a shaking hand, sloshing as much as she served. She learned to twist away, to smile a tight, false smile, to pretend she didn't hear the filthy things they whispered. Every touch felt like a brand, every leering look a violation. Her clothes were torn again when a drunken miner tried to pull her onto his lap and snagged the cheap satin. She cried out, and Wes was there in an instant. He backhanded the miner, but his eyes were on Clara. Don't you tear the merchandise, he snarled at the man, but his look to Clara was clear. This is your fault. She was allowed to sleep for a few hours before dawn. Locked back in her room, she did not sleep. She sat on the cot, shaking, watching the gray light seep through the dirty window. She overheard the plan later that day. She was carrying a bucket of dirty water through the main room, now empty and smelling of stale beer and regret. Juergens was at the bar with his man, Pike, and the bartender. She'll fetch a high price, Juergens was saying, counting a stack of coins. She's got that untouched look. Men pay double for that. What's the plan, boss? Pike asked. This Saturday, we'll call it a special auction for her hand in marriage. Of course, for one night. He laughed. A wet, choking sound. Highest bidder gets to be the first to comfort the new bride. Clara's blood ran cold. The bucket slipped, crashing to the floor, spilling foul water over the sawdust. Juergens' head snapped up. His eyes narrowed to slits. You eavesdropping? No, sir, it slipped, she stammered. He strode over to her. He didn't slap her this time. He just looked at her, his smile slow and cruel. Well, now you know. Gives you something to look forward to, don't it? Saturday night. You'd better fetch a damn good price, girl. Or you'll wish you had. He pointed to the mess. Now clean it up, with your hands. Clara knelt, scooping the wet, filthy sawdust. her tears dripping onto the floor. Saturday. She had 2 days. Across the street. Eli Granger sat in the darkness of the livery stable's hayloft. He had ridden into town at a hard pace, the gray dawn breaking at his back. He had stabled Buck, telling the hostler he was waiting for a smith. He had found this spot, a gap in the boards of the loft. That gave him a clear view of the Dustwater Saloon. He watched all day. He had seen her. He had seen them drag her out in that red dress. He had seen the men touch her. He had seen her flinch, her small figure moving through the crowd like a cornered rabbit. His insides were a cold, tight knot. He had come to do something. He had come to stop this. But he was one man. Juergens had at least 4 men working for him that Eli could count, not to mention a saloon full of customers who wouldn't interfere. His inner turmoil was a quiet, grinding torment. He saw her, and he saw Anna. He saw his own failure. He knew that to act was to invite violence. Blood would be shed. His, most likely. He was good with a rifle, but this was close work. To walk in there was suicide. And to do nothing? To do nothing was to sit in this hayloft and watch a soul be murdered. It was to ride back to his cabin and drink himself to death, haunted by 2 ghosts instead of 1. The guilt of inaction was a heavier weight than the fear of death. He was a dead man already. He was just waiting for the ground to claim him. Maybe this was the way. He watched as the sun set. He saw the lamps in the saloon glow to life. He saw Clara May, her shoulders slumped, her face pale, carrying a heavy bucket. He saw her drop it. He saw Juergens talk to her. He could not hear the words, but he saw her face crumple. He saw her kneel. A rage, cold and clean, settled over him. He was done waiting. He was done thinking. That night, Clara May made her move. She had been locked in a room, but Juergens, drunk and sloppy, had not turned the key all the way. She had worked at it, pushing and pulling, her fingers raw, until she felt the bolt slide back. Her heart was a drum against her ribs. She waited until the saloon was at its loudest. Sometime after midnight, she eased the door open. The hall was empty. She slipped down the back stairs, which led to the kitchen. A cook was asleep at a table, his head on his arms. She saw the back door. It was used for deliveries, for trash. It was dark. Hope, sharp and painful, flared in her chest. She crept across the kitchen floor. Her bare feet made no sound. She reached the door. It was bolted, top and bottom. She worked the top bolt. Her breath held. It slid back with a soft squeak. She froze. The cook snorted and turned in his chair, but did not wake. She bent to the bottom bolt. It was stiff with rust. She put both hands on it and pulled. The door flew open, and she stumbled back, falling into the arms of Pike. He had been outside, smoking. His massive hand clamped over her mouth before she could scream. "Trying to run. Little bride?" he grunted, his voice amused. "The boss ain't gonna like this." He dragged her, kicking and fighting, back through the kitchen. He did not bother being quiet. He threw her into the main room, where she landed on the floor at Juergens' feet. The music stopped. The room went silent. Juergens looked down at her, his face dark with fury. "You ungrateful little witch." He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her, not to the stairs, but to a door behind the bar. It was a storeroom. He unlocked it and threw her inside. The room was small, cold, and windowless, smelling of stale beer and rats. "You'll stay in here till Saturday," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "No food, no water. We'll see how much fight you got in you then." He slammed the door. She heard the heavy bar drop into place. She was in pitch blackness. She curled on the cold floor, bruised and shaking, and for the first time, she gave in to utter despair. Eli watched the next day. The snow had started, light, feathery flakes drifting down, dusting the mud. He watched the saloon all day. He did not see Clara May. He saw Maybelle. She came out the back, her face tight with worry. She looked up at the small window of Clara's room, then went back inside. A few minutes later, Eli saw her arguing with Juergens near the back storeroom. He saw Juergens shove her, hard, Maybelle went back to work, her face pale. Eli knew. She was in that back room. She was hurt. The sun began to set on the second day. The light was failing, the snow turning from a light dusting to a thick, driving curtain of white. A blizzard was rolling in. It was time. He checked his Winchester. He had 6 rounds in the rifle, and his Colt revolver was full. It would have to be enough. He slid down from the loft. He walked to Buck, pulled the cinch tight, and looped the reins over the rail. Ready. He walked out of the livery. He did not run. He walked across the street, the snow swirling around him, deadening the sound of his boots on the boardwalk. He reached the bat-wing doors of the Dustwater Saloon. The piano was playing. The laughter was loud. They would not hear him. He did not push the doors. He kicked them. He kicked them so hard they flew off their hinges, crashing into the tables behind them. Eli Granger stood in the doorway, framed against the swirling white snow. His rifle held low. The piano stopped. A glass shattered. For a heartbeat, the entire saloon was frozen. "Juergens!" Eli's voice was not a shout. It was a low, clear sound that cut through the silence like a razor. Juergens, who had been at the bar, turned. His eyes widened, first in surprise, then in rage. "Granger, what in the hell do you think?" "Where is the girl?" "What girl?" Juergens snarled, his hand moving slowly toward the gun under the bar. Eli fired. He did not aim at Juergens. He aimed at the mirror behind him. The massive, expensive mirror exploded, showering Juergens and the bartender in a cascade of shattered glass. Men yelled, diving for cover. Pike, who had been at a table, drew his gun. Eli was already moving, firing from the hip. The shot took Pike in the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down, screaming. Eli didn't stop. He used the rifle like a club, smashing it into the face of a man who tried to grab him. He strode toward the bar, a relentless, silent force of fury. The bartender raised a shotgun. Eli fired his last round into the man's chest. He vaulted over the bar, landing among the broken glass. Juergens was gone. He had run. "Clara!" Eli yelled, his voice raw. He heard a faint sound, a scratching, from the storeroom door. It was barred from the outside. He put his shoulder to it, but it was solid oak. He stepped back and fired his revolver into the heavy iron bar, shattering it. He kicked the door open. It was black inside. He fumbled for a match, struck it on his boot. In the flickering, tiny light, he saw her. She was curled in a ball on the floor. In the corner, her red dress was in tatters. Her face was swollen, a dark bruise blooming on her cheek. Her lips split. She was shaking so violently her teeth chattered. When she saw him, she flinched, scrambling backward, her eyes wide with animal terror. She did not see a rescuer. She saw another man come to hurt her. The match burned his fingers, and he dropped it, plunging them back into darkness. He heard Juergens shouting in the main room, calling for his men. There was no time for words. There was no time to explain. Eli stepped into the darkness of the room. He holstered his revolver. He unbuttoned his heavy sheepskin coat. He said nothing. He reached down, and she screamed. A thin, choked sound. He ignored it. He wrapped the coat around her, the sheepskin warm against her cold skin. He lifted her. She weighed nothing. She was a bird. She was too stunned to protest, too weak to fight. She just held on, her face buried in the wool of his coat. He walked out of the storeroom, carrying her. The saloon was a wreck. Men were groaning. Juergens was by the door, his face purple, a gun in his hand. "Put her down! Granger!" he bellowed. Eli walked toward him. He did not slow down. He did not stop. His face was a mask of cold death. Juergens raised his gun, his hands shaking. He looked into Eli's eyes, and his nerve broke. He fired, but the shot went wild, shattering a window. Eli kept walking. Juergens scrambled backward, out of his way. Eli walked through the broken doors, out into the night. The blizzard hit them, a solid wall of wind and ice. The street was empty. No one was watching now. He reached Buck. The horse stood steady, a dark shape in the swirling snow, with one arm still holding Clara tight. Eli swung himself up into the saddle. He settled her in front of him, his arms a cage of muscle and wool. She was shivering, but she was quiet. He kicked his heels into Buck's flanks. The horse lunged forward, grateful to be moving, to be away from the noise and the blood. They galloped down the main street, past the dark, curtained windows, and out of the town. The storm closed in behind them, a white curtain that erased their tracks, erased the town, erased everything but the wind and the cold and the man and the girl, riding as one into the heart of the wilderness. The world dissolved into a chaos of white. The blizzard struck them with the force of a physical blow, a howling, shrieking wall of ice and wind. Clara May, enveloped in the heavy sheepskin coat, could see nothing. She could only feel the driving snow stinging her face, the violent, lurching power of the horse beneath her, and the iron-hard arm of the man who held her. He had wrapped her in his coat, but he sat exposed to the storm, his back a rigid wall against the wind. She was pressed against his chest, her face buried in the rough wool, which smelled of leather, snow, and a faint, metallic tang of blood. She was shaking so hard she thought her bones might come apart. It was not just the cold. It was the terror. This man, Granger, had appeared like a demon, his rifle blazing. He had killed. She had seen the bartender fall. She had heard the man named Pike scream. He had shattered the saloon, and then he had taken her, swinging her up as if she weighed nothing, and thrown her onto his horse. She did not know if this was a rescue or a capture. He was a violent, silent man. He had said nothing, not a word, since he had kicked open that storeroom door. She was a piece of property, passed from one brutal owner to another, from her uncle to Juergens, and now to him. The journey was a nightmare. They rode for hours, climbing higher into the mountains. The wind was a solid thing, trying to peel them from the saddle. The snow deepened, slowing the horse to a grueling, stumbling walk. Buck, the big buckskin, was laboring, his breath coming in great, frosted clouds. Eli said nothing. He just rode. He navigated the blinding white with an instinct she could not understand, shielding her with his body as much as he could. Once, she heard a sound that made her blood freeze, a long, high-pitched howl, thin and hungry, carried on the wind. "Wolves," she whimpered, pressing her face deeper into his chest. His arm tightened around her, a painful, reflexive grip. It was the only acknowledgement he gave. He spoke only once, his voice a raw shout to be heard over the storm. "Hold on, we're close." Close to what? She was numb, her feet and hands gone, her mind beginning to drift into a dangerous, hazy warmth. She was so tired, it would be so easy to sleep. She was fading, slipping into the cold. When the horse finally stopped, she felt Eli swing his leg over, his weight leaving the saddle. She slumped forward, too weak to hold herself up. He was there instantly, pulling her down, her legs buckled, having no feeling. He caught her, lifting her bodily. He kicked open a door. The wind howled, pushing them inside, and then the sound was cut off. There was a sudden, deafening silence, broken only by the shriek of the wind outside the walls. He did not put her down. He carried her through the pitch blackness until his boot hit something, and he set her down on a rough, raised surface, a rope bed. She was shaking too hard to speak. He left her. She heard him moving in the dark, a scraping sound, a metallic click, a spark, and then another. A tiny flame flared to life. He was feeding it dry tinder, his movements economical and sure. In seconds, a small fire was crackling in a stone fireplace. The light flickered, illuminating a one-room cabin. It was small, crude, and abandoned, a trapper's lean-to. There was a broken chair, a small table, and the bed she sat on. It was filthy, but it was out of the wind. Clara huddled in the massive coat, watching him. He was a terrifying figure, caked in snow, his face dark with stubble and grim purpose. His revolver was still strapped to his hip. He looked like a wolf himself. He went back out into the storm, disappearing for a long minute, She tensed, her heart leaping. Was he leaving her? He returned. His arms full of firewood he must have seen under a drift. He dropped it by the fire and went out again. He came back leading his horse, Buck, into the cabin. There was no stable. He tethered the exhausted animal in the far corner, where it stood, head down, shivering. Only then did he turn his full attention to her. She shrank back on the bed. He was between her and the door. She was trapped. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. He approached. She clamped her eyes shut, turning her face to the wall. A small, choked sound in her throat. She was braced for the blow, for the hand in her hair, for the rough demand. It did not come. She felt him stop. He stood there for a long time. She could feel his gaze on her. "Your feet," he said. His voice was rusty, harsh. She did not respond, only curled tighter. "Girl, your feet. Give them to me." It was a command, not a request. Trembling, she edged her legs, still clad in the saloon's flimsy stockings, toward him. Her red satin shoes had been lost in the ride. He knelt. His hands were large, scarred, and rough. He was surprisingly gentle as he peeled the frozen, wet stockings from her skin. Her feet were white, waxy, dead-looking. He cursed, low and bitter. He went to the fire, scooped a handful of snow he'd brought in, and came back. He began to rub her feet, hard, with the snow. It was agony. She cried out, a thin, sharp sound, as the feeling began to return. A fire of pure, sharp needles. "It has to be done," he said, his voice flat. He did not stop, his grip hard, forcing the blood back into the frozen flesh. He did it until her feet were red and she was sobbing from the pain. He did the same to her hands. He looked at her face. The bruise on her cheek was a dark, ugly purple. Her lip was split. He took a corner of his own shirt, dipped it in the cleaner snow, and dabbed at the blood, his touch impersonal, like a doctor or a veterinarian. He did not meet her eyes. When he was done, he stood up. He went to his saddlebags and pulled out a dry blanket and a piece of hard, dried jerky. He tossed the blanket at her. "The coat's wet." She scrambled to pull the heavy, snow-caked coat off and wrap the thin, scratchy wool blanket around her. She was still in the tattered red dress. He tossed the jerky onto the bed. "Eat." She looked at the hard, dark strip of meat. Her stomach clenched, but she was starving. She tore at it with her teeth, the salty, smoky flavor overwhelming. Eli Granger said nothing more. He took his bedroll and laid it out on the far side of the fire. As far from her as he could get, he sat with his back to the wall, pulled his rifle across his lap, and began to methodically clean it. He did not speak. He did not look at her. He just sat, a silent guardian, or a silent jailer. Clara watched him until her eyes were too heavy to stay open. She fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. The sound of the storm and the steady, rhythmic snick-snick of him cleaning his gun the last things she heard. The blizzard raged for 3 days. They were prisoners in the small cabin. The world was a screaming white void. Clara woke in fits, her nightmares of the saloon mixing with the reality of the cabin. But each time she woke, the scene was the same. Eli was there. He was either feeding the fire or staring into it, or cleaning his weapons. He never slept, or so it seemed. He kept his distance. He never touched her. He never spoke, except in single words. "Water," he would say, handing her a tin cup of melted snow. "Eat," he would grunt, handing her another piece of jerky or a hard biscuit from his dwindling supplies. On the 3rd day, she woke to silence. The wind had stopped. The sudden quiet was more alarming than the storm. She sat up. Eli was gone. The place by the fire where he sat was empty. His rifle was gone. Panic seized her. He had left her. He had abandoned her here to starve. She was no better off than before. She ran to the door, her bare feet stinging on the cold floor. She pulled it open. The light was blinding. A new world, buried in white, lay before her. The snow was piled 5 feet deep against the cabin, and then she saw him. He was standing 20 yards away, his back to her, rifle in hand. He was just watching the snow-covered forest. He was hunting, or he was guarding. He heard her and turned. He did not seem surprised. He just looked at her. "Go inside," he said. "You'll freeze." She retreated, her panic replaced by a deep, hollow confusion. He had not left her. He came back an hour later, a rabbit dangling from his hand. He tossed it onto the table. "You'll learn," he said. He pulled a knife from his belt. "We're low on food. You eat, you work, watch." He taught her. His teaching was as harsh and unforgiving as the land. He showed her how to set a snare, his big hands moving with surprising deftness. He made her check them. When she found a rabbit in one, she flinched. "You kill it," he said. "I can't." "Then we don't eat." He made her do it. He showed her how to skin it, how to gut it, his face impassive. She wept, her hands covered in blood. But she did it. He taught her how to build a fire from wet wood. He taught her how to patch the rips in his sheepskin coat, the one he had given back to her, using a needle and thread from his saddlebag. She sat by the fire, her fingers, still clumsy with cold, pushing the needle through the thick hide. He sat across from her, sharpening his knife. The silence between them was vast, but it was no longer the silence of terror. It was the silence of two animals in a den, waiting out the winter. She began to trust that he would not harm her. He had had every chance. He was violent, yes, but his violence was a tool, like his knife or his rifle. It was not the casual, cruel sport of West Jurgens. He was distant, walled off, but he was, in his own grim way, keeping her alive. They had been in the cabin for a week. The routine was set. He hunted. She tended the snares, cooked the meager food, and kept the fire. The nights were the worst. The terrible memories had room to breathe in the dark. One night, she was stewing another rabbit, the smell thick in the small space. Eli was staring into the fire, his face lost in a shadow she was beginning to recognize. It was a look of profound, bottomless grief. She did not know why she spoke. The words just came out. They were going to auction me." He did not move. He gave no sign he had heard. She continued, her voice a low, trembling whisper. "That Saturday, Mr. Jurgens, he said the highest bidder would be the first. He called it a marriage. For one night." She stopped. The only sound was the bubbling pot and the crackle of the fire. He put me in that red dress," she whispered, the tears starting to fall, hot and silent. "And the men, they touched me. Their hands were everywhere. I felt so dirty. I still feel dirty." She was crying now, the sobs she had held back for so long finally breaking free. It was a raw, ugly sound. She pulled her knees to her chest, burying her face. "He locked me in that dark room. I thought it was over. I just wanted to die. I'm broken." Eli sat like a stone. He did not move for a full minute. She cried until she was empty, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Finally, he moved. He stood up, and she flinched, expecting him to yell at her, to tell her to be quiet. He walked over to his bedroll, took his only blanket, and walked to where she sat. He did not touch her. He just draped the thick wool blanket over her shaking shoulders. He stood over her for a moment, a great, dark shadow. "It wasn't your fault," he said. His voice was a rasp, like stones grinding together. "He put his hands on you. The dirt is on him, not you." He turned, walked back to his spot, and sat down. He stared into the fire, his hands clenched on his knees, his knuckles white. He did not speak again all night. A spark had formed. In the vast, frozen isolation, two wounded souls had seen each other. She saw his pain, the wall he built to contain it. He had seen her shame, and he had not turned away. The next day, the cold snap broke. The sun came out, weak but bright. The air was warmer, and Eli set about chopping a massive pile of wood. Sensing a change in the weather, he took off the heavy sheepskin coat. He was wearing a dark flannel shirt, and as he worked, the sweat began to soak through. He stopped, and with an impatient grunt, he tore the buttons open and shrugged it off. He was wearing a thin cotton undershirt. In minutes, it too was plastered to his skin. Cursing, he ripped it off over his head and tossed it aside. Clara, who had been mending a tear in her own tattered dress, stopped. His back was to her. It was a map of old, healed violence. Long, white scars crisscrossed his skin. A puckered, round scar was dug deep near his shoulder blade. A bullet, fainter but still visible, were the cross-hatched lines of a rope burn, or something worse. He turned, grabbing another log. His chest was as scarred as his back. A long, ropey mark ran from his collarbone down toward his heart. The muscles in his arms and chest were hard, defined by the work. He was not a soft man. He was a man made of hard edges and old pain. He swung the axe. The wood split with a clean thwack. He moved with a brutal, mesmerizing grace. Clara watched, her needle forgotten in her hand. She felt a strange, confusing warmth spread through her stomach. It was a feeling she had never known. It was not fear. It was something else. An attraction, raw and bewildering. She, who had been so terrified of men, of their touch, was looking at this man, the most dangerous man she had ever met, and she was not afraid. She was drawn. He stopped, mid-swing. He sensed her gaze. He turned his head slowly and looked right at her. His eyes, usually so flat and gray, were dark, intense. He saw her watching him. He saw the look on her face. He said nothing. He held her gaze for a long, breathless moment. Then he turned back to the wood, and the thwack of the axe was the only sound. Clara's face was burning. She dropped her eyes back to her sewing, her fingers trembling. That night, the real storm came. It was not snow. It was a furious, howling wind that drove the temperature down into a deadly cold. The wind found every crack in the cabin, turning the small space into an icebox. They piled the wood on the fire, but it was being eaten as fast as they burned it. The flames roared, but the cold crept in, relentless. By midnight, they were both shaking uncontrollably. Their breath was fog. Eli got up from his spot. He looked at Clara, who was huddled under her blanket and his coat, her teeth chattering. "It ain't enough," he said, his voice clipped. "We'll freeze separate." He took his bedroll and spread it on the floor, on the warmest patch of ground near the hearth. He piled her blanket and his coat on top of it. "Get in," he commanded. She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "Now, Clara, this ain't a request. It's survival." She hesitated, then scrambled from the bed and slid under the pile of covers. The ground was hard, but the heat from the fire was strong. He lay down beside her, on top of the covers, a solid wall between her and the cold room. But it wasn't enough. The cold was a physical thing, clawing at them. She was still shivering. He was rigid, his body tense. After a long, silent hour, he let out a low, rough sigh. "This ain't working. Turn over." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What?" "Turn over. Your back to me." Her hands shaking. She did as he said, turning her back to him. She was stiff with fear. She felt him move, lifting the covers. He lay down behind her, his body fitting against hers, and pulled the blankets over them both. His body was a furnace. He was all hard muscle and solid heat. He pulled her back against his chest, his arm coming around her waist, tucking her in. It was not a gentle embrace. It was a necessary, practical act, like huddling a newborn calf. They lay there in the dark, the wind screaming outside. She could feel his heart beating, a slow, steady thump against her back. She was terrified, but as the minutes ticked by, another feeling rose. She was warm, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. She was truly, deeply warm. She was safe. She did not know how long they lay there. She was drifting, caught in a strange place between sleep and terror. She felt the tension in him. He was wide awake. His body was rigid, his breathing controlled. She was so aware of him, the weight of his arm, The feel of his chest against her back, the calloused skin of his hand, resting on her stomach. Slowly, tentatively, she moved her own hand. She lifted it and brought it to rest on top of his, where it lay on her. He seized. His entire body went rigid. His breath stopped. Then, his fingers clamped down on her hand, his grip like a steel trap. It was not a caress. It was a capture. She felt a fine, violent tremor run through him. "Don't," he whispered. His voice was not human. It was a low, broken sound, a raw wound in the darkness. "Don't you start what you ain't ready to finish, girl." She froze, terrified. She had done the wrong thing. He did not let go, but his grip, after a long, agonizing moment, loosened. It did not release her. He just held her hand, pinning it there against her own body. His fingers locked with hers. He was shaking. She could feel it. He was fighting something, a battle so fierce it made his body tremble. They did not move. They lay like that for the rest of the night, bound together by the cold, by his grip, and by the screaming of the wind. The air in the cabin was no longer just cold. It was electric, charged with his warning, her fear, and a desperate, unresolved current that passed between them in the dark. The winter broke not with a sudden crack, but with a slow, agonizing thaw. For weeks, the world was a misery of dripping water, slush, and thick, clinging mud. The sound of the wind screaming was replaced by the sound of the high snows melting, a distant, constant roar. In the trapper's cabin, the atmosphere grew tense. The enforced intimacy of survival was over, replaced by an awkward, heavy silence. Eli Granger became restless. He would stand at the open door for an hour at a time, staring at the gray, sodden landscape, his jaw set. He was a man in a cage. Clara May watched him. Her fear of him long since evaporated, replaced by a quiet, protective understanding. She had seen the man who stared into the fire and saw ghosts. She had felt the violent, controlled tremor in his body as he held her. One morning, the sun broke through the clouds, watery but warm. The smell of damp earth and pine rose from the ground. Eli turned from the door. "Pack what we have. We're leaving." He had a destination in mind, though he had not shared it. Clara, however, had one of her own. "South," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "There's a town, Willow Creek. I knew someone there. A girl I grew up with before. Her name is Sarah. Her father was a blacksmith." Eli looked at her. It was the first time she had offered a plan, a piece of a future. He gave a single, sharp nod. South, the journey was a different kind of grueling. The snow was gone from the low ground, but the trails were rivers of mud. Buck, their horse, struggled, and they were forced to walk most of the time. Eli leading, Clara clinging to the stirrup leather. They had his rifle, his revolver, one blanket, his sheepskin coat, and a small canvas tent. They had a few cartridges, a knife, and a tin pot. They were no longer prisoners of the cabin, but they were terribly exposed. They were fugitives, with no supplies and a long way to go. The nights were cold, but the air was clear. They slept under the stars. Eli would build a small, smokeless fire, and they would huddle near it, sharing the meager game he managed to snare, a squirrel or a brace of skinny rabbits. The silence of the wilderness was vast, and in the small circle of firelight, the walls between them began to wear thin. They started to talk. It began as a necessity, small words about the trail, about the lack of game, but the shared isolation demanded more. One night, a week into their journey, Eli was cleaning his rifle, his scarred hands moving with practiced and chored grace. Clara was mending the hem of her tattered dress, the only garment she owned besides his coat. "You never said," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Back in the saloon, you came for me. Why?" He did not stop his work. The firelight cast deep shadows on his face. "I told you, I saw them drag you in. A lot of men saw," she said. "Mr. Henderson, the men on the boardwalk. They all saw. They did nothing." Eli oiled a rag and slid it down the barrel. The shh sound was the only reply for a long time. He seemed to be deciding. "I was married," he said. His voice was rough, lower than usual, as if the words hurt his throat. Clara froze, her needle poised. "Her name was Anna. 4 years ago. We had a small place in Montana. I was gone, checking the high pastures. Riders came through. Drifters." He stopped. His hands were still, clenched on the rifle. They hurt her, badly. Before they ended it, they burned the ranch. I came home to smoke, and to her." Clara watched him, her heart aching. The air grew cold and thin. "I hunted them," he continued, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "It took me 2 weeks. I found them in a canyon, drunk, dividing her things, her locket, her clothes." He looked up from the gun and stared into the fire. "I didn't take them to a sheriff. I didn't ask questions. I was done with questions. I killed them both. The one who did it. He did not die fast." He said it simply. A fact, a piece of his own history, hard and sharp as obsidian. He had confessed murder. He had laid his darkest part at her feet. He was waiting for her reaction, for the fear, for the revulsion. Clara May looked at his profile, at the hard line of his jaw, the deep, old pain in his eyes. She did not feel fear. She felt a profound, aching recognition. She saw the man who had sat in a hayloft, torn apart by his own conscience. She saw the man who had walked into a saloon full of guns, his face a mask of cold fury, to retrieve a girl he did not know. She understood. West Juergens, the men who killed Anna. They were cut from the same cloth. She set her sewing aside. "You told me the dirt was on him," she said softly. "The dirt was on them, not on you." He turned his head and looked at her. He had expected to be judged. He had not expected to be understood. The confession hung in the air, clearing a space between them. Now it was her turn. "I still have it," she said, her voice small. "My mother's book, the one I hid under my mattress. It was the only thing I tried to take with me when I ran." He frowned, not understanding. "I want to be a schoolteacher," she said, the words coming out in a rush. A secret she had guarded more closely than he had guarded his. To have such a dream, after what had happened to her, felt like a naive, childish thing. "I know it's foolish, after what I am, but I dream of it. A small room, slates, and children who want to learn their letters. I dream of reading to them, of a life that is quiet." She was crying, silent tears of shame for her own hope. Eli just watched her. He saw her, truly saw her, for the first time, not as a victim, not as a burden, but as a thing of impossible, unbreakable strength. Juergens and her uncle had taken everything from her, but they had not taken this dream, this light. He who lived in darkness was stunned by it. He said nothing. He just went back to cleaning his gun, but the space between them was no longer empty. It was filled with his past and her future. The thaw continued. The air grew warmer. They made better time. Following a high ridge south, the world was turning a fragile, pale green. One afternoon, they came upon a river, wide and rushing with snowmelt, but clear. They had been walking for a month. They were caked in the mud of the trail, the soot of their fires, the grime of survival. Eli stopped. "We'll camp here. We need to clean." The word hung in the air. Clean. It meant more than just dirt. He set up the small camp, then took the kettle. "I'll get water. You wash. Stay close." He was giving her privacy, but his rifle was never far from his hand. She watched him walk upstream. She was terrified. To be clean was to be vulnerable. She looked at the tattered, filthy red satin dress she still wore, a constant reminder of the saloon. She took his sheepskin coat and laid it on the bank. She took his spare shirt, and then, her fingers trembling, she unlaced the ruined dress and let it fall to the ground. She stood in her thin chemise, her skin white and bruised. She walked into the river, The water was so cold it stole her breath. It was a baptism of ice. She scrubbed her skin, her hair, her hands, trying to wash away the memory of Jurgens, of the men's hands, of the dirt floor of the storeroom. She washed until her skin was raw and red, and she was shaking. She waited out, her teeth chattering. He was there. He was just standing on the bank, his back to her, watching the far tree line. He was guarding her. He must have heard her, but he did not turn. She pulled on his clean, oversized wool shirt. It fell to her knees, soft and smelling of him, of wood smoke, leather, and salt. She felt human. She walked to the fire, where the dress lay in a heap. She picked it up, her lip curling, and threw it into the flames. The cheap satin hissed, blackened, and curled into nothing. He turned at the sound. He saw her, standing by the fire, his shirt hanging off her small frame, her damp hair clinging to her face. He saw the red dress burning. He took a step toward her, and stopped. The air between them was so thick she could not breathe. It was the cabin, the storm, the trembling hand, all over again. But this time, there was no blizzard. There was no excuse. He looked at her, his face a battleground of pain and something else. Something new, something he had not allowed himself to feel in 4 years. She was not afraid of him. She had seen his soul, and he had seen hers. She walked to him. He stood like a statue, braced. She saw the scars on his chest through the opening of his shirt. She saw the pulse beating in his throat. She raised her hands, slowly, so as not to startle him. She laid her palms flat on his rough, bearded cheeks. He flinched, his eyes squeezing shut. A sound tore from his throat, a low groan of such profound agony and longing that it broke her heart. He had been starved, not for food, for this, for a touch that did not take, but gave. He did not kiss her. He could not, so she pulled his head down, rose on her toes, and pressed her mouth to his. It was not a kiss. It was a seal, a promise. Then, his control broke. His hands, which had been frozen at his sides, came up. One buried itself in her damp hair, gripping her head. The other went around her waist, lifting her, crushing her against him. He kissed her back. It was the kiss of a man who had forgotten how. It was the kiss of a man starved, drowning, dying of thirst. It was not gentle. It was rough and clumsy and desperate. His beard scraped her skin. He kissed her like he was trying to breathe her in, to pull the life from her into him. It was slow, and it was aching, and it was charged with every unspoken word, every shared fear, every lonely night. He kissed her until they were both shaking, until their knees were weak. He broke away, his breath ragged, pressing his forehead against hers. His eyes were closed, his face twisted in a kind of beautiful pain. He said nothing. He just held her. That night, the small canvas tent felt different. He laid out the bedrolls, side by side. He looked at her, his face dark in the firelight. It was a question. She untied the leather string at the throat of his shirt. She walked into the tent and lay down. She was terrified, but she was not afraid of him. She was afraid of the world, but not of him. He followed her, a large, dark shadow that blocked the opening. He knelt before her. He did not move. "Clara," he whispered. It was the first time he had used her name. It was a plea, a warning. "I am not Anna," she whispered back, her voice shaking. "And I am not that girl from the saloon. I am just me, and you are, you." She reached out and laid her hand flat on his chest, over the long, ropey scar. He shuddered and came to her. It was not perfect. It was fumbling and raw and emotional. They were two broken, damaged things, trying to make a whole. His hands, scarred and rough, were surprisingly tender, tracing the fading bruise on her cheek, his touch hesitant, as if she might break. She was not a victim. She was mutual in this. Her hands explored the map of his scars, learning the history of his pain. It was hungry. It was a desperate, human need to feel something other than cold and fear. It was a reclamation. It was built on a foundation of shared pain and a desperate, rising want to be seen, to be held, to be alive. When he finally found purchase inside her, she did, this time. The tears that came were not of pain, but of a fierce, profound release. He held her, his body trembling, and buried his face in her hair, a silent, broken man finding a moment's grace. Clara woke first. The dawn light was filtering through the canvas, pale and gray. She was warm, tangled in the blanket, her body pressed against his back. She felt his heat. She felt safe. A small, fragile happiness bloomed in her chest. Then he moved. He did not wake slowly. He snapped awake, his whole body tensing. He was instantly, terribly, aware of her. He pulled away from her as if he had been burned. He sat up, his back to her, and scrubbed his hands over his face. He was breathing hard. Clara sat up, pulling the blanket to her chin. "Eli? Get dressed," he said. His voice was flat, cold, dead. It was the voice from the cabin. She recoiled, the small, fragile happiness shattered. What is wrong?" I said. "Get dressed." He stood, pulling on his trousers, his back rigid. He would not look at her. He was ashamed. He was a man haunted by a ghost. He had spent 4 years building a wall around Anna's memory, and he had just betrayed it. He had taken this girl, this victim he was supposed to be protecting, and he had soiled her. He was a monster, no better than Juergens. The shame was so thick he was choking on it. Clara knew nothing of this. She only knew the man who had held her with such aching tenderness last night was gone, and this cold stranger was in his place. He regretted it. He regretted her. She was dirty, after all. She was saloon goods. Tears of a new, bitter humiliation welled in her eyes. She dressed in silence, her movements stiff. He was outside, kicking dirt onto the fire. "We're moving, now!" The silence between them was awful. It was worse than the fear, worse than the cold. It was a new, raw wound. They saddled Buck and rode south. One silent, miserable person in front. One silent, miserable person behind. They entered a narrow box canyon near noon. It was a shortcut, a game trail. The high walls blocked the sun. Eli suddenly pulled Buck to a halt. The horse's ears were pinned back. "Get down!" Eli hissed. Clara slid from the horse, her heart hammering. "What is it?" A voice echoed from the rocks above them. Well, looky here, boys, if it ain't the little runaway bride." Clara looked up. On the ridge, silhouetted against the sky, were 3 men. One was huge, his arm in a sling. Pike and Granger. Pike snarled. "I owe you for this shoulder. The boss wants the girl back. He wants you dead. I don't much care which order." Eli shoved Clara behind a cluster of boulders. "Stay down. No matter what you hear, stay down." He pulled his rifle from the scabbard. "She ain't going back. Pike, that ain't your choice to make." A shot cracked, the sound echoing, deafening. In the narrow canyon, the bullet sparked off the rock near Eli's head. The world exploded into chaos. Eli fired, worked the lever, fired again. He was not a man anymore. He was a machine built for this. He moved low, from rock to rock, a deadly shadow. A man screamed from the ridge, clutched his chest, and toppled forward, rolling down the scree. "One! He's over there!" Pike yelled. "Get him! Silas!" Another rifle cracked. Eli grunted. Stumbling back, he clapped a hand to his side. Clara gasped. "I'm fine," he yelled. "Stay down." He brought his rifle up, aimed at the puff of smoke. He fired. There was a yelp and the sound of a man scrambling away. "We're leaving," Eli yelled. Running back to her, he grabbed her arm, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was not fine. A bullet whined past her ear, so close she felt its heat. Eli shoved her toward Buck. "Get on! Get on!" He fired twice more toward the ridge, covering them. He mounted up behind her, his arm locked around her waist. "Ride!" he yelled, kicking the horse into a desperate, plunging gallop. Bullets chased them, zinging off the canyon walls. They raced out of the trap, back onto the open plain, and did not stop. They rode for hours, pushing Buck to his limit. Eli was slumping. His arm around her waist was heavy, wet. She looked down. His hand, pressed to his side, was covered in dark, bright blood. "Eli," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Keep riding," he gasped. "Cave, up, ahead, has to be, shelter." He was falling. He was falling out of the saddle. She grabbed the reins with one hand, her other arm hooking around his chest, holding him on. He directed her, his voice a faint rasp, a cleft in the rocks, hidden by overgrown brush. She pulled Buck to a halt and slid off. Eli fell into her arms. He was a dead weight. She was not strong enough. "Eli, please," she begged. She dragged him, inch by agonizing inch, into the shallow, dark cave. He lay on the cold stone floor, his face the color of ash. "Saddlebag," he choked out. "Carbolic, rags." She ran, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unbuckle the strap. She found the small brown bottle, a roll of clean linen. She ran back. She was bleeding. He was bleeding. The front of his shirt was a dark, sodden mass. She tore it open. The wound was a dark, puckered hole in his side, just above his hip. It was oozing, a steady, terrifying flow. "Here," he panted, trying to sit up, but he fell back, his eyes rolling. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice high with terror. She uncorked the bottle. Her hands were shaking. She poured the antiseptic onto the wound. Eli screamed. It was not a yell. It was a raw, animal sound of pure agony that clawed at the air. His back arched off the ground, and then he went limp, his eyes closing. He passed out. She stared, frozen. His face was still. He was not breathing. "No," she whispered. "No, oh, God, no." She shook his shoulder. "Eli, wake up." He was limp. She pressed her ear to his chest. Nothing. She pounded on his chest with her small fist. "No, you can't. Wake up." She pressed her ear again, listening, praying. A faint, shallow thump. He was alive, but he was dying. The blood was still coming. "Don't you die," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, splashing onto his. "Don't you dare die. Eli Granger, you can't leave me. Not now." She grabbed the clean rags, folded them into a thick pad, and pressed down on the wound with all her strength. She was shaking, crying, her body racked with sobs. She was no longer the girl who needed saving. She was the one who had to save. She held the rag, pressing the life back into him, and prayed to a God she had long since forgotten. Her voice a desperate, broken chant in the darkness of the cave. "Please, don't take him. Please, don't die." Eli survived. It was a near thing, a touch-and-go battle waged in the cold, damp darkness of the shallow cave. For 2 days, he was not in this world, but in a gray, burning land of fever and ghosts. Clara May did not sleep. She was a fierce, desperate guardian. She kept the wound clean with the last of the carbolic, a process that made him thrash and groan in his delirium. She kept the pressure. She used the last of their rags, when the fever was at its worst and his skin was dry and burning. She tore a strip from her own chemise, soaked it in the icy water from a seep in the rock, and bathed his face, his neck, his chest. She huddled against him, using her own small heat to fight the violent, bone-racking shivers that followed. She was no longer a girl. She was a woman, forged in violence and fear, and she would not let this man die. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. She awoke from a slumped, exhausted doze, her head on his shoulder, to find him staring at her. His eyes were clear. They were gray, and they were full of a pain that had nothing to do with the hole in his side. He was weak, his voice a dry rasp. "You're still here?" "I'm still here," she whispered, her throat thick with relief. She held a cup of water to his lips. He drank, his gaze never leaving her face. He saw the new, hard lines around her mouth, the exhaustion in her eyes. He saw the woman who had held him together. He looked away, at the dark, weeping stone of the cave wall. "I was cold," he whispered. When I touched you, after, I was ashamed." Clara sat back, her heart constricting. The rejection, which she had buried in the panic of the shootout, returned, sharp and cold. "I saw her," he breathed. His eyes squeezed shut. "Anna, I felt like I was betraying her, like I was no better than Jurgens, taking what wasn't mine, what I had no right to." He turned his head back to her, and the shame in his eyes was terrible. "And that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was, I needed it. I needed you. I haven't felt anything but rage and cold in 4 years. And you made me feel—" His voice broke. "I'm scared. Clara, I'm scared of that. I can't lose that again. I can't lose you. I am a coward. I'd rather be dead and cold than feel that and lose it." His confession lay between them in the dark. It was the last, most protected piece of him. The truth of his rejection was not that she was soiled. It was that he was terrified. Clara May looked at this strong, broken man, this man who had faced down a saloon full of guns, but was terrified of a feeling. She felt a surge of strength, of anger, of profound, aching love. She took his hand. It was still weak, but his fingers reflexively tightened on hers. "I am not a ghost, Eli," she said, her voice clear and hard. It was the voice that had told him not to die. "I am not Anna. I cannot replace her." "And I will not try." She leaned closer, forcing him to meet her gaze. "I am Clara May. I am real. I am sitting right here, covered in your blood and dirt, and I am alive. I am not some fragile thing you will lose. I am a person who stays." She squeezed his hand. "You did not rescue a ghost from that saloon. You rescued me. You are worth fighting for, Eli, and I am worth fighting for. I am not a memory. I am real, and I am right here." He stared at her, the confusion and shame in his eyes warring with a new, dawning hope. He saw her. He saw the strength that had held him, that had dragged him into this cave, that had kept him alive. He raised his hand, his movement slow, trembling with weakness. He laid his palm against her cheek, the one that had been bruised. His thumb was rough, but his touch was a question. She pressed her face into his hand. In the darkness of the cave, they found each other. He drew her down, his mouth finding hers. This time, there was no desperation. There was no hunger, no raw, starved need. It was slow. It was emotional. It was a kiss of profound, aching tenderness. It was a promise. It was two survivors acknowledging the life in each other. It was not frantic. It was the most deliberate, intimate thing either of them had ever known. His hands, no longer rough, explored her face, her hair, her shoulders, as if memorizing her by touch. Her hands were gentle on his scarred chest, her touch a balm. They moved together slowly, a quiet, healing ritual in the dark, a reclaiming of what had been torn from both of them. Afterward, she lay curled against his good side, her head on his shoulder, his arm holding her close. The silence was no longer empty. It was full. "I will stay with you," she whispered into the darkness, against his skin. "I don't care where we go. I don't care if the whole world hates us. I am with you." He could not speak. He just held her, his grip tight, his face buried in her hair. And for the first time in 4 years, Eli Granger slept without nightmares. They recovered in the cave for a week. The wound was clean, but deep. He was weak. Clara became his hands and feet. She took the skills he had taught her and honed them. She set the snares. She found a small spring and kept them in fresh water. She even took his rifle, the one she had feared, and practiced. She had fired it in the canyon. A wild shot of panic. Now, she aimed. She shot a grouse. She was a bad shot, but she was determined. She brought him the bird, proud. He watched her, a small, pained smile touching his lips. He was the dependent. She was the provider. And in this reversal, something healed in him. He learned to need her, and the world did not end. When he was strong enough to stand, to walk, the old tension returned. "We need to move," he said, his voice grim. "Pike got away, or the other one. They'll be back, or Jurgens will send more. We go south. We lose ourselves in the territories. Clara was cleaning the rifle. She did not look up. No. He stopped, stunned. No, Clara. They will hunt us. They will, she agreed, sliding the oiled rag through the barrel. They will hunt us to California. They will hunt us to the ocean. Wes Juergens will not let this go. He was humiliated, and he is a collector. He will not stop until he has me, or I am dead. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and hard. I am done running. Eli, I have been running my whole life. From my uncle, from that saloon, from Pike. I will not run any more. What are you saying? He said, his voice low. Dangerous. Go back. That's suicide. He has the town. He has the law. He has the fear, she corrected. That is all. He has a few hired men and a sheriff he pays. But we have something he does not. We have Mr. Henderson, who is sick with guilt. We have Maybelle, who hates him. We have a town full of people who are just waiting for someone to be stronger than him. We are two people, Eli argued. The old, cold logic returning. One of us half-healed. We are two people who are not afraid of him, she countered. You were not afraid when you walked in there the first time. I am not afraid now. We don't go back for revenge. Eli, we go back to stop him. We go back so I can be free. So we can be free. He looked at her. The girl he had pulled from the mud. The woman who had saved his life. The partner who now stood before him. She was right. Running was just a slower way to die. He gave a single, sharp nod. All right, we go back, but we don't go in blazing. We go in smart. We cut the head off the snake. They traveled by night, hiding during the day. It took them 4 days to reach the hills overlooking the town. It sat in the basin, a small, dark stain on the landscape. Eli went in alone, under the cover of a new moon. Clara waited, her heart a cold stone in her chest. He was gone for 3 hours. He found Maybelle in the alley behind the saloon, emptying a trash bucket. She saw him, a shadow detaching from the darkness, and nearly screamed. He clapped a hand over her mouth. It's me, he hissed. Granger! Her eyes were wide with terror. You're a ghost! Wes said Pike shot you both. Pike's dead. Wes lied. Clara's alive. She's in the hills. We're here to finish this, but I need your help. Maybelle! Tears streamed down her face. He'll kill me. He's been terrible. Since you left, he's looking for you. He'll kill you anyway. Maybelle, you know his moods. Help us. Help Clara. Help yourself. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a hard, cold anger. She nodded. What do you need? I need Henderson, the storekeeper. Maybelle brought Mr. Henderson to the root cellar beneath the store. The man was pale, his hands shaking. Granger, my God, I thought you were dead. Not yet. Juergens is trying. He has new men? 4 of them, Henderson whispered, wringing his hands. He's paranoid. Keeps 2 in the saloon at all times. The sheriff, Corbett, is there every night at 9, like clockwork. Drinks on the house. Juergens owns him. We need a distraction. Eli said, a big one. Something to pull those guards. And Wes, out of the saloon. Henderson looked around his cellar, at his barrels of molasses, his sacks of flour. I have a back storeroom, full of oil, old canvas, turpentine. It's insured. I hate this town. I hate him. He looked at Eli, a small spark of courage in his eyes. I could start a fire, a big one. The fire bell will bring everyone running. The plan was set. Henderson would light the fire at 9:30, just after the sheriff was settled. Maybelle would unlock the saloon's back door. Eli would go in during the chaos. No, Clara said, when Eli returned and told her. No, it's a good plan. I'm going with you. Absolutely not, Eli snarled. You're the target. You'll be safe here. I am not the target, she said, her voice quiet. I am the other half of this. He needs to see me. The town needs to see me. They need to see that I am not afraid of him anymore. I'm going, he argued. He raged. But he looked in her eyes and saw the same iron he had seen in the cave. The fire bell shattered the night. Clang, clang, clang! Shouts of "Fire!" erupted from the main street. "Fire at the general store!" From their hiding place, they watched the Dustwater Saloon. The bat-wing doors flew open. Men poured out, Juergens among them, running toward the glow. He left 2 men, just as Henderson had said. "Now," Eli said. They moved like shadows to the back of the saloon. The door was unlocked. Maybelle was just inside, her face pale. "He's still in there. Wes, he came back. He's suspicious." Eli drew his revolver. He handed his rifle to Clara. "Stay here, by the door. If he gets past me, you run." "I'm not running," she said, her voice low. She held the rifle, her knuckles white. Eli stepped out of the back room. The saloon was hazy with smoke, lit by a few dim lanterns. The 2 guards were at the bar, pouring whiskey. Wes Juergens was standing by the front door, peering out at the fire. "Wes!" Eli's voice cut through the room. Juergens spun around. His face, when he saw Eli, was a mask of pure, disbelieving rage. "You!" he hissed. The 2 guards drew their guns. Eli was faster. He fired twice, 2 clean shots. The guards fell, one clutching his chest, the other his throat. The bartender dove for cover. "You're dead!" Juergens shrieked, pulling his own revolver. "Pike killed you. Pike was slow," Eli said, his gun steady. "It's over. Wes, it's not over." Juergens' eyes were wild. "I'll kill you. No." Clara stepped out of the shadows. She was not holding the rifle. She was holding Eli's other revolver, the one he had taught her to use. Her hands were shaking, but her gaze was level. Juergens stared at her. The terror was gone. The tears were gone. The torn red dress was gone, replaced by trousers and one of Eli's shirts. This was not the girl he had broken. He was trapped. He looked from Eli's cold stare to Clara's steady hand. He was a coward. He did the coward's thing. Maybelle was cowering by the stairs, too terrified to run. Juergens lunged, grabbing her, yanking her back, his arm locking around her throat. He pressed his revolver to her temple. "Drop it, Granger!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Drop it, or I'll splatter her! I swear to God!" Eli froze. He had a shot, but Wes was using Maybelle as a shield. "Let her go! Juergens! Drop the guns! Both of you! Now!" Wes was laughing, a high, panicked sound. "I'll kill her, then I'll kill him, and I'll take you, you little bitch, back to the storeroom. We'll start over right." He was focused on Eli. He was dragging Maybelle back, his eyes locked on the biggest threat. He did not count Clara. She was just a girl. Clara had a shot. It was to the side. He was exposed. She saw Maybelle's terrified, tear-streaked face. She raised the heavy revolver with both hands, just as Eli had taught her. She saw the arm, the one holding the gun to Maybelle's head. "Clara, don't!" Eli yelled, afraid she would hit Maybelle. She fired. The explosion was deafening. Juergens shrieked, a high, thin sound of pure agony. The gun clattered from his useless hand. His arm, shattered at the elbow, hung limp. He stared at it, his face a mask of disbelief. Maybelle wrenched free, scrambling away. Juergens looked at Clara. His eyes were full of a black, uncomprehending hatred. He lunged with his good hand, scooping for the fallen gun. Eli fired. The single shot was a flat crack in the sudden silence. Wes Juergens hit the sawdust, his eyes wide. He did not move again. The silence was absolute. Clara stood, the revolver still pointed, smoke curling from the barrel. Eli moved to her side. He put his hand on her shoulder. The bat-wing doors burst open. Sheriff Corbett stood there, his own gun drawn, flanked by half the town, pulled from the fire. He took in the scene, the 2 dead guards, Wes Juergens, dead, Eli and Clara, standing over him, Maybelle, sobbing in the corner. Corbett was a practical man. His paymaster was on the floor. The town's terror was dead, and the entire town was his witness. He slowly, deliberately, holstered his revolver. He looked at Eli. He looked at Clara. He looked at Juergens. "Well," he said, his voice loud, carrying to the crowd at the door, "it seems Mr. Juergens' luck has finally run out." He looked at Mr. Henderson, who was standing in the front row. "I've been hearing things, Henderson, rumors, that Juergens wasn't a good man, that he held this girl, Clara May Dalton, against her will, that her contract was fraudulent." Henderson found his voice. It was shaking, but it was loud. "It was, Sheriff. He forced her. He bought her from her uncle. We all saw it. It was a crime." A murmur went through the crowd. Shame, surprise, and a deep, quiet relief. The sheriff nodded, as if settling a great legal question. "Then I'd say this was self-defense, and a justifiable act. That girl," he pointed at Clara, "is legally free of any contract, any debt." He kicked at the sawdust. "This establishment is closed, indefinitely." The saloon was shut down. The crowd began to murmur, the shame turning to quiet conversation. They looked at Clara and Eli with a new respect. Corbett looked at Eli. "Granger, I suggest you and Miss Dalton find a new town. The air here," he glanced at Juergens' body, "is foul." Eli nodded. He took the revolver from Clara's unresisting hand. He took her hand. It was cold. He led her out of the saloon, through the silent, parted crowd, and into the clean, cold night air. They were free. They did not sleep. They left the town before the sun came up, before the smoke from Henderson's burned-out storeroom had cleared, before the first curious citizen had poked his head out to see the body of Wes Juergens being hauled away. They left with one horse, one rifle, 2 revolvers, and the clothes on their backs. Eli had retrieved his saddlebags from the livery, and that was all. The townsfolk who saw them go watched from behind their curtains. They saw the hard man, Granger, walking, and the girl, Clara May, riding his horse. They looked like survivors of a war, which, in a way, they were. They rode east for the first hour, into the rising sun, as if heading for the flatlands. But when they were out of sight, in the shelter of the low foothills, Eli stopped. He stood by the horse's head, looking at Clara. He did not give a command. He asked, "South, to Willow Creek." Clara looked south, toward the place that had once been her only hope. It seemed small and far away now. Then she looked north, toward the high, cold mountains that had been their first terrible sanctuary. It was a hard, unforgiving land. It was also the place she had found him. It was the place she had found herself. "No," she said, her voice quiet, but sure. I'm tired of running to places. I want to build one." She looked at the snow-capped peaks. "Let's go home." He looked at her for a long moment, a slow, unpracticed smile touching the corners of his mouth. He nodded. He took the reins, and they turned north. They returned to the same mountains, but this time they were not fugitives. They were not a man and a girl, a captor and a victim. They were Eli and Clara, a partnership, equals. They rode in the open, under the high blue sky, and for the first time, they were not hiding. The trapper's cabin was as they had left it, cold and small and dark. It had been a prison. Now, it was a beginning. They spent that summer building. Eli had his old cabin, the one where he had lived with his ghosts, a day's ride away. They salvaged from it. They took the stove, the rope bed, the tools. He tore down the lean-to for the seasoned lumber. He sold his small, neglected herd of cattle in a distant town, trading them for things they needed: an axe, a saw, glass for 2 windows, a pregnant milk cow, and a crate of 6 nervous chickens. They chose a spot in a high meadow, sheltered by aspen and pine, with a clear stream running through it. He felled the trees, his axe swinging with a familiar, steady rhythm. But the sound was different. It was not the angry, desperate chopping of a man at war with the world. It was the solid, purposeful sound of a man building a home. Clara worked beside him. She was not strong, but she was tireless. She learned to score the logs, to mix the daubing, to chink the walls against the wind. He worked with a quiet, focused energy. She worked with a fierce, joyful one. They built the house side by side. He did not command her. He taught her. Hold the draw knife like this, Clara. Pull it toward you. Let the blade do the work. And she taught him. You must talk to the chickens, Eli, or they won't lay. He would stand, his face rigid with embarrassment, and mutter a gruff "mornin'" to the hens, which made Clara laugh, a bright, clear sound that startled them both. Their love grew in the spaces between the work. It was not a thing of grand passions or breathless declarations. It was a thing of simple, daily acts. It was the way he brought her a cup of hot coffee in the morning, his hand brushing hers. It was the way she mended a tear in his shirt, her head bent, the firelight catching the gold in her hair. It was in shared, quiet meals of rabbit stew and the lumpy cornbread she was learning to bake. Their nights were chaste at first. The work was too hard, their bodies too tired. They slept on separate pallets, the memory of the cave, of the shame and the healing. Still a raw, new thing, but the cold came, and the house, while solid, was new. The fire was the only warmth. One night, she woke to find him standing by the window, staring out at the moonlit snow. He was not looking for ghosts. He was just restless. "Eli?" she whispered. He turned. "Go back to sleep. It's cold." "So are you," she said. She held up the edge of her wool blanket. An invitation. He came, not with the desperation of the riverbank or the healing tenderness of the cave, but with a quiet, simple rightness. He lay beside her, and they held each other under the heavy blankets, their bodies fitting together, two halves of a whole. Their kisses were slow and deep and familiar. They made love with the quiet confidence of a husband and a wife, of two people who had earned this peace, who had fought a war for it. It was a love that was as solid and as real as the log walls they had built. As the house took shape, Eli began to work on a project of his own in the evenings. He sat by the fire, a block of fine, straight-grained pine across his knees, and he carved. Clara would watch him, his scarred hands moving with a surprising, gentle skill. She thought he was carving another bird, like the one he kept from his first wife, Anna. She never asked. On the first day of true, deep snow, when the world outside was a silent, white blanket, he brought it to her. It was not a bird. It was a desk, a small, sturdy writing desk, with a slanted top, a place for an inkwell, and legs carved with a simple, climbing vine. Clara stared at it. She touched the smooth, oiled wood. It was a thing of beauty, but it was more. It was her dream. It was the slate and the classroom. It was the quiet life she had whispered about in the dark. She looked at him, her eyes flooding with tears. "Eli?" It was all she could say. He ducked his head, embarrassed. "It's just some wood. A woman with a book ought to have a place to read it." She began that winter. Word traveled, as it does in the high country. Two homesteaders, a family named Miller, lived 12 miles down the basin. They had 2 children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 10, who were growing up as wild as the aspens. Clara sent word. She would teach them. 3 days a week, the Miller children would ride their mule up to the cabin. Clara would sit with them at her new desk, her mother's book open, and she would teach them their letters. Eli would sit in the corner, mending a harness or oiling his rifle, and he would listen to her voice, clear and patient, explaining the shape of an A or the sound of a B. He watched the light in her, the light he had first seen in the fire, and it filled his home, chasing out the last of the shadows. One evening, they sat on the small porch they had built, watching the spring meltwater turn the meadow into a carpet of green. The air was soft. It was a year to the day since he had walked into the Dustwater Saloon. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. His arm came around her, a familiar, comfortable weight. "I never thanked you," she said, her voice soft. "Not properly. For what you did. For walking into that saloon. You saved my life, Eli." He was quiet for a long time, watching the sun paint the high peaks with a brush of rose and gold. He covered her hand with his. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. When you were in that storeroom, you were just a girl, but I was a dead man. I was in a cabin, drinking myself into the ground, just waiting for my turn to die. You were the one who woke me up. You saved me, too." She had been working on a secret. She had traded her mending and 2 jars of wild berry preserves with a traveling peddler. He had given her 10 yards of white cotton, as fine as she had ever seen. For weeks, when Eli was out checking his snares or hunting, she had sewn. One warm evening in July, he was on the porch, working a piece of leather, the smell of it sharp in the air. The sun was low, turning the tall meadow grass to gold. She came out. He heard the screen door sigh shut and looked up. She was wearing the dress. It was simple, a plain white cotton, with a scooped neck and short sleeves. It had no frills, no lace. It was just clean and white. He stared. This was not the ghost in the tattered red satin. This was not the urchin in his oversized shirt. This was Clara. She was beautiful. The setting sun lit her hair, and her smile was shy, but radiant. It's just a dress," she said, her voice catching. He could not speak. She laughed, a small, nervous sound. And then she did a thing that stunned him. She stepped off the porch, into the tall grass. She was barefoot. She lifted her arms, turned her face to the sky, and she began to dance. She spun in a slow circle, her white dress floating around her, her feet light in the grass. It was a dance of pure, unbridled joy, a dance of freedom. Eli sat, his hands still, the leather forgotten. He watched her. He watched this woman who had been sold and beaten and locked in the dark, who had been hunted and shot at, and who had saved his life in a cold cave. He watched her dance, barefoot, in a meadow they had claimed, in front of a house they had built, the wall he had kept around his heart, the last cold stones of his grief for Anna, the last vestiges of the man who had looked away. They did not just crumble, they dissolved. He put his head in his hands, and for the first time since he had buried his wife, Eli Granger wept. They were not tears of grief. They were tears of a painful, impossible, cleansing grace. He felt her hand on his head. He looked up. She was kneeling in front of him, her dance over, her face full of a deep, knowing love. She did not ask him what was wrong. She knew. She simply took his face in her hands, as she had at the river, and she kissed the tears from his cheeks. That winter was a good one. The house was warm, the woodpile high, the small root cellar full. One night, a blizzard raged outside, a mirror of the one that had first thrown them together. But inside, it was warm. Eli was reading, his lips moving silently, sounding out the words from a primer she had gotten for him. Clara was tidying, folding his few spare shirts, in the bottom of his saddlebag, the old one he had carried from Montana. She felt something. Tucked into a slit in the leather lining was a piece of paper, folded small and stiff. She pulled it out. It was stained and worn. It was his handwriting, the rough, barely practiced letters he had been so ashamed of. It was not dated. It was not addressed. She unfolded it. She wants to be a teacher. It read, "After all of it, Juergens, the men, the red dress. She still has light. I have not seen light in 4 years. I am afraid of it. I am afraid it will show me how dark I am. But she is strong. She is not a ghost. She is real. Her strength makes me want to be real, too. It makes me remember that life can be not just something to get through, but something to live. I think life can be beautiful." Clara's hand went to her mouth. She looked at him. He was watching her, his face exposed, his eyes full of a love so deep it left her breathless. He had written this in the trapper's cabin. He had written it, and he had kept it. "Eli," she whispered, her own tears coming now, hot and full. She walked to the fire, to the circle of lantern light where he sat. She knelt before him, and she read the last line aloud, her voice thick but clear. I think life can be beautiful." He said nothing. He simply reached out and pulled her to him. He stood, lifting her into his arms, and held her, his face buried in her hair. They stood in front of the fire, the blizzard howling outside. Two souls, no longer haunted, no longer broken, just together, fiercely alive and in love. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would be honored if you would let us know where in the world you are listening from. Please, leave a comment below. If you enjoyed the tale, we hope you will subscribe to From Wild West, and we would love to hear your thoughts, in English, on the story of Eli and Clara.